𝗔𝗰𝗁 zvaita pakaoma vakomana manhero akanaka vana veZimbabwe ndoti tasvika naye tatinonoke zvishomanini kutanga pane logistics dzakatibata mukoma Ishmael dzafadza zviri sei mukoma Manu Nyasvimbo zviri kufamba here kuvana veZimbabwe vese vari kumativi mana enyika ndoti makadii sanganai neni nai zviri sei mukoma Manu zviri kufamba here we want to look at a situation that is currently happening in Zimbabwe where a criminal syndicate, we've got a criminal syndicate that is rose. Simba was sorting out British police this evening. Simba has got balls, has got guts, still balls. Namgoma maskura senda square. Anaona Simba kumapurisa zvafamba sei. Simba was telling the police that look, the police in the UK they've arrested Shinyanga here. If you look at the way, the manner they arrested Shinyanga and the manner they are prosecuting Shinyanga, it is not a fair arrest, it is not a fair prosecution. Because remember last time when I was talking about yesterday, it's just yesterday, I was talking about Zimbabwe soldiers firing at fleeing civilians. Some were shot from behind. In the Zimbabwe, their videos are watched on social media. The Zimbabwe National Army killing civilians. That is never allowed in anywhere in the world. That must not be acceptable. To say soldiers, trained soldiers, people who use state firearms, those firearms they are bought by Zimbabweans. We are taxpayers. So they use taxpayers' money to acquire weapons of war. When they acquire weapons of war, they are there to defend Zimbabwe against foreign invasion, not against protesters. Some people are protesting. Zimbabweans are hungry. They go on protest. They are hungry. They want jobs. There are no jobs in Zimbabwe. If people protest, it is their constitutional right to protest. So if people want to protest, the Zimbabwe government does not allow such a democratic right to take place in Zimbabwe. At the end, they shoot civilians, they kill civilians. The day Chinyanga cried, you still remember the day Chinyanga cried. He cried when Zimbabwe soldiers was gunning down innocent civilians in Harare. Chinyanga went live on Facebook whilst people were being murdered. Chinyanga cried. It is normal for every human being, if you are sensitive enough, to cry when you see that blood, innocent blood, is being spilled by the government. So instead of the British government to go and intervene in Zimbabwe militarily to save innocent Zimbabweans who were being gunned down by trained soldiers, they are busy arresting innocent people, victims of ZANU-PF, people who are crying, people who are contributing to say, look, guys, these people who are being shot and killed by the government are innocent, are not armed. So the government becomes terrorists. But the British government, they paid a deaf ear, they played a blind eye. Instead, they went on to arrest one of the victims, one of ZANU-PF victims. You understand? Instead, they went on to arrest one of ZANU-PF victims, something which should not have been done. Even if you listen, I've read Chinyanga's story. from the press when they were saying he encouraged the shooting. They are not being clear why, which people were encouraged by Chinyanga to say, let's shoot, let's bomb, let's do this. It was Chinyanga said the people of Zimbabwe must learn to organize themselves and fight back in cases like this, where the government will release or will deploy armed soldiers to go and kill and shoot innocent civilians. Women, innocent women were shot and killed. Children were shot and killed. And those vendors were shot and killed by the soldiers who were firing in the central business district of a country, Harare, the administrative seat of the capital seat. This is where, of the country, the administrative seat of the country. This is where the soldiers were deployed to go and fire randomly at fleeing civilians. So this Chinyanga had right to say people should come together, people should put their heads together and map up a way of defending themselves. Even if it means bombing those petrol stations, bombing this. We know who owns petrol stations in Zimbabwe. And the proceeds of those petrol stations are the ones which are used to kill innocent people. And Chinyanga said, we know those targets of people who are killing Zimbabweans. And why can't we organize ourselves and retaliate when the army is shooting at you? Because already it's no longer a national army. It is now a terrorist army. It's an army of terrorists. This is why I am saying here, the rise of criminal syndicate. Zimbabwe government is a criminal government. This is why you see, even after those killings in 1 August, on 1 August 2018, after those killings, the commander of presidential guard which shot and killed people was slapped with the sanctions. So the world recognized that this gentleman is a terrorist. You understand? So the way to deal with a terrorist is to put that terrorist on sanctions. He's the person who deployed the soldiers at the instigation of the president, who was the commander-in-chief of the army. Also, Chiwenga was the general of the army. So the general of the army, the commander-in-chief of the army, and the commander of presidential guard, they all connived to arm Zimbabwe soldiers with arms of war, deploy them in the CBD, shoot and kill innocent civilians. This is where Chinyanga cried, said, but why? The international community, you are just watching. You can't come and help innocent civilians. It happened in Syria. All the European countries, they went to Syria to assist innocent civilians who were being massacred by that idiot in Syria. It is happening in Israel. They send soldiers in Israel. Already, as I'm speaking, soldiers are on their way to Ukraine, which can trigger a third world war. You understand? It's because the British, the Americans, they are trying to stamp out or to stamp down or to fight terrorism, to end terrorism wherever it is initiated. But they pay a blind eye when terrorism is initiated by a government like the Zimbabwe government. This is where Chinyanga came in. This is where Chinyanga cried. Say, look, people are being killed. The world is watching. People are being shot and killed. If it happened in Libya, the Americans will intervene. If it happens in Sudan, the British will intervene. If it happens anywhere, these superpowers will intervene. But they are paying a blind eye to our situation where women and children are gunned down. Maskati machena, vanhu vari kupfurwa vachiurawa muZimbabwe. Andimuriona, vanhu vari kudisappear muZimbabwe. Saka munhu akachema kuti ko nai hamungatibatsirewo here, tarisai zviri kuita vanhu. Kana mara kutadza kutibatsira zvaanani zvedu isusu totongoorganizana. Kana tichinzi tiri kudhutsa zvimapetrol station, toenda tonodhutsa kana zvinzi tiri kukanda matombo kumasoja acho handei tikande matombo nokuti tiri kupfurwa tiri kufa hatina munhu ari kutiona ari kuuya kuzotibatsira kuzimbabwe. Ukraine border kwakaipa kuUkraine border very soon we might be deployed there utomboenda tomboona kuEuropean kuUkraine kwakaipa hakuna kumira zvakanaka andinimona. So all these are signs of a failure. These are signs or indicators of a state that has failed. Because if you look at the growth of criminal violence initiated by the army, by the police, as I'm speaking right now, the army, the police, the prison officers are busy robbing Zimbabweans. They are busy robbing Zimbabweans. If people were doubting, yesterday, but one we saw a judgment from the tribunal sentencing those soldiers to 40 years each in prison for robbery. That means the soldiers are robbing, the police are robbing, the prisons are robbing, the Air Force are robbing. And what are the causes? This is the rise of a criminal syndicate sponsored by a criminal government, a government of terrorists that has seen Zimbabweans killed. Innocent people, women and children were gunned down. Takatarisa. 10 Downing Street, Takatarisa, vanhu. The British police, Vakatarisa, vanhu Zimbabwe. They've never even come and say, Zimbabweans, look what is happening to our. They never suggested that they are going to assist us because we are under attack. And as a result, they arrested Shinyanga, William. He's all over the press. Shinyanga is a terrorist. This is what they are saying. Mr. 𝗥𝗶𝘀𝗲. It's so pathetic, ladies and gentlemen. So Zimbabwe is what I'm saying here is an indicator of state failure. And if you see the growth of criminal violence in our country, we've recently seen the surge of robberies perpetrated by the soldiers. Because the state authority has been weakened by corruption. The state authority has failed to stem corruption out. And as the state becomes criminal in its oppression of its citizens, Zimbabwe government is criminal in its oppression of its citizens. This is why you see there is lawlessness in our country. Lawlessness becomes apparent when the criminal state or the oppression of its citizens become so open. We have seen government officials vakaita sana 𝗤𝗍𝗻𝗁𝗁, vakaita sana Moyo, vakaita sana 𝗥𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗃, creating criminal gangs to take over the streets and those artisans' mind. There are criminal gangs now which have taken over the streets of Zimbabwe. The cities have been taken over by criminal gangs. Those artisans' mine, Mashurugwi, have taken over control of those artisans' mine. This is where you see arms and drug trafficking become more common. Zimbabwe has become a failed state. Marumba really say Zimbabwe has become a failed state, ladies and gentlemen. Ordinary police force become paralyzed. Police can't do anything. Police cannot go and arrest gang 𝗤𝗍𝗻𝗁𝗁. They go around with matches vachitema vanhu musoro andimuona. So you see the behavior that we are witnessing of the ordinary police force, of the ordinary army soldiers, of the ordinary police prison officers. It has become a norm in Zimbabwe to say so for protection, citizens naturally turn to those warlords. This is why you see ukaenda vanzi kuma-artisan mine kumashurugwa vanenge vachitobhadhariswa kunzi uprotectwe, because the citizens now have turned to those gangs for protection. Because the likes of 𝗤𝗏𝗀𝗃𝗃 have turned themselves into warlords, running gangs of matches, mashurugu, tema vanhu. They've become strong figures in our country. And on. So there is now there is no possibility of security forces providing security to the people of Zimbabwe. And if you look at the state itself, the state has crumbled. If you look at rates of urban crime today, robberies in everywhere, in every town as small as Karoi, a lot of robbers are there. So this is the rise of a criminal syndicate. It testifies the collapse of a nation. This has left Zimbabweans so desperate for protection, so desperate for security. There is no security at all in our country. A man genius, ZANU-PF needs reckon, say Jola, So Zimbabwe, as I have stated yesterday, that Zimbabwe is a failed state. Failed states provide only limited quantities of essential political goods. If you look at Zimbabwe, it has become a failed state. And if you look at how political goods are distributed, they are just limited quantities. They more and more for fate to upstart warlords and other non-state actors. Their role as the preferred suppliers of political goods. If you go to Zimbabwe, today if you go to Zimbabwe, these are some of the political goods that have been distributed by these warlords. Towards my elections are you will see that these political goods will be distributed. Nema warlords this is what these are indicators of a failed state. A failed state that is no longer able or willing to perform fundamental jobs of a nation state. If you look at Zimbabwe, the fundamentals of a state, a nation state, of a modern Zimbabwe, of a modern world, they are not there at all in Zimbabwe. And in so even all the institutions of government, I've mentioned prison, police, national army, NRZ, all they are flawed institutions, a failed state which exhibit flawed institutions. That is only the institution of the executive function which is working at the moment. If legislators exist at all in Zimbabwe, they are just there to rubber stamp. They are just there as a rubber stamp machine of corruption. Democratic debate is noticeably absent. This is why you see Vanamnanga got the sponsor sana Douglas Monzura, who elected members of parliament from parliament. But what they don't want in parliament is a democratic debate. They don't want, they just whip their members of parliament into line with so even if you look at the judiciary is derivative. It's a derivative of the executive rather than being independent. Vanamalava vandoenda kunokumbira majudgment kubva kuZANU-PF kuna 𝗔𝗰𝗀𝗃𝗃 kuti ora tine nyaya MDC judgment achitopa tichiti kudii. Tine munhu tina last mainga hama nana madzokere vatiri kutonga ne trumped up charges of murder. Saka tovatonga mutongo wakaita sei. Bunu wanted to sentence these guys to death. Imagine, because there is Musarurwa who is a woman, we are not going to sentence them to death. But otherwise, last Mainga Hama and the Madzokere could have been hanged. Because we have got a judiciary a judiciary which is a derivative of the executive. Whatever decisions that our judiciary give, they are not independent judgments. The judiciary, they ask Munanga Gwagudi, Mosha Itoitonga say, Vavare Mtongo ku State House. Our judiciary is no longer independent. And the citizens know that. We cannot rely on the court system. Nosaka murikuona vaienda kuGwara-Tsvangirai vanakupi vachichema vachiti gaiti wine zvese pakuwina zvese hazvirori vaida kuwina zvese. Is it because we've got we can no longer rely on this court system to significantly address or remedy issues that are against the state. So ZANU-PF, if you look at the bureaucracy, has long ago lost its sense of professionalism, responsibility, and exists solely to carry orders from the executive. As parungoda vamwe 6 chete vanenge vomugoma nyika yanaka inonaka ndozvatakuda. Saka nyaya yandiri kutaura panapa inyaya yakanaka yokuti mukaona kana utongi hwenyika chaiyo chaiyo, nyika yeZimbabwe hapasina neconfidence nekutongwa kwainoitwa. Akusina professionalism, especially in our civil service. There is no professionalism at all. Civil service yese yakungotora the orders from the executive. Vachimirira kunzwa kuti president vati kudii. Musauri kuona president ezvinezvi anonovhura toilet, anonovhura bus stop, anonovhura corner yeroad, anoenda kunovhura garden. Because this is what we say a failed state, a collapsed state. Like my developments arimo muZimbabwe, hakuna president anoenda kunovhura garden. Kwaituma sabhuku endai munovhura garden. Andi muri kuona? Saka you will find kuti masabhuku havasina basa rekuita. It's a failed state. It is a country that is thirst of development. There is no development at all happening. This is why you see president achinovhura garden, achinovhura ka-footbridge. A whole president official opening a footbridge. And on. So this is just a way of oppressing the citizens of a country. The military is possibly the only institution with any remaining integrity. But if you look at our military, it doesn't have any integrity at all. If you look at our uniformed forces of Zimbabwe, which is a failed state, they are often highly politicized. We have got a highly politicized armed forces, devoid of the esprit that they once demonstrated. Waiti ukabvunza munhu wese wekuZimbabwe kuti amenyi yakamira sei, vaikudza kuti we have got the best army in the world, probably the best army in Africa. But now that esprit that they once demonstrated, it is long gone because the armed forces are now highly politicized. Like last time, remember when I was saying ZNA is now a wing of ZANU-PF. It's no longer the Zimbabwe National Army that should protect the citizens of a country. It is now a wing of ZANU-PF which works to protect only ZANU-PF people. When we want to demonstrate, they come shoot us. The police come arrest us. The prison, they butcher us. You understand? So these are indicators of a failed state. A failed, if you look at all failed states, ladies and gentlemen, are typified by deteriorating or destroyed infrastructures. Go look at Zimbabwe. For you to know that Zimbabwe is a failed state, look at its infrastructure. It's wholly destroyed. Buildings dilapidated. Everything has deteriorated in our country. Ukaenda kuparenya kwa unofuwa uri pachipatara ere, everything has deteriorated. So metaphorically, the more potholes, look at all the main roads which have been turned to rutted trucks. the roads that had tar during Ian Smith regime, they are now rutted tracks. Yokuti kamotikari inenge yakufamba padzopesana paya tuvhiri tumwe tokatsika pambenge pane katara tumwe mavhiri akatsika kudust. Ukatasa road dzese major roads in Zimbabwe potholes. Pane imwe yamautona takaposta yai mombe dzakutonwa imomo kukanaya mvura yogarira mombe dzotopfura dzichinwa mvura ipapo. So the more a state will, that's what exemplifies a failed state. When our roads have got potholes, when we can't do production, when we can't do anything, our rulers, they continue to siphon funds from the state coffers. So we were left with fewer capital resources for road crews. We can't buy road equipment. We can't buy road raw materials to maintain our potholed roads. So maintaining road or railway access to distant districts becomes less and less of a priority. So what I'm saying, if you go to Zimbabwe today, we were supposed now to be having a railway line that will run from Harare to Chirundu. But there is no train that goes to Chirundu. There is no train that goes to Kariba. There is no train that goes to Binga. There is no train from Harare that goes to Victoria Falls. Because to them it's not a priority. This is what we call a failed state. Your road up ndachema zvangu pakaipa ndemera. Unoona what you drive a motikari muka road kasara rutted trucks. Panenge basara pano kuti mavhire ekwakagara driver anenge ari pakatara mamavhiri ese ari kudust kuti uchipesana neimwe inenge chidriver yakadaro apana bono enjoy comfort yemotikari. Andimona. So they can't maintain the roads. They can't maintain if the railway system. There are no railway access. 42 years or 43 years after independence, there are no railway access to other provinces. Chico, you understand what I mean? No railway access to other provinces. Let's go ahead, tap water everywhere. Akuna mvura. Severon Murise. Akuna nemvura. So you find that failed state prioritize shooting people. In the CBD of Harare, people are shot. Food is all around the hondo munyika. Wanachiurawa msito of Harare. Andimona. Tochema isusu tokomana. Tikurairwei. Na British amusikuona here. Americans amusikuona here. South Africa chacha amusikuona here. Zvirikuitika pamirapo. Zambia. Matregerera Botswana mukona zvirikuitika. They don't care. Once an abnormal truck gone in front of you, you are finished overtaking. Pakaipa. Atete zvirise ndakasima. Anditi murikuona nyaya tiri kutaura. So maintaining of those roads, maintaining of those railways, linking of important cities by railway is not a priority to them. Because of corruption, it has become less and less of priority. Even refurbishing basic navigational aids along arterial waterways, to them it's not a priority. Becomes typified by neglect, where the state still controls such communication backbones as if you look at Zimbabwe, they control like the landline telephone system that form a political and economic good betrays a lack of renewal. Upkeep yacho ema telephone acho booth akuna. Unoda kuona kuti ukada kutarisa embotarisa ukada kutarisa kuti internet chaichayo, very few people are in Zimbabwe watching here. They can't access the internet. We've got only one radio station when it comes to communication. We've got only one radio station. We've got one TV station. And there is even no investment in our country. So these are the daily realities, ladies and gentlemen. The country has failed. The country has definitely failed. They can't repair the roads. Services have collapsed. Hospitals have collapsed. Thank you, at the floor. Everything has collapsed. But amuna here, vamunoziva vangabatana nemuti bvise mhandu. Problem yapo ndeyekuti remember last time when I was talking about these issues, the people of Zimbabwe, they are so gripped with fear. Ini ndakataura ndikati kana ndafa ropa rangu vabereki vangu vacharona pasi pemurezi weZimbabwe. People are gripped with this fear. I don't know, this is fear of the unknown. But the daily realities are bar. We see them every day. Hakuna kana ma private entrepreneurs who come to our country and they are not permitted by the state to do like tikati kune company iri kuya kuzoisa ma landlines aibvumirwe. Tikati kune company iri kuya kuzoisa ma cell phones pakauya iya inonzi mango yai kwakanetsa. Andimona. Because there is monopoly in that country. Kuti strife masiwa apo license zvakanetsa. Because vanenge vane monopoly of everything. Zimbabwe is a failed state, ladies and gentlemen. Zimbabwe is a country that has collapsed. Everything that is happening in our country, it needs state interference. Kugadzirwa motikari zvinonzi zvekumberi kwemotikari zvinonyorwa nhamba zvezvimanhamba zvimalicense zviya chikuisa pamberi pemotikari chichochiya chotonzi hanzi chototambudza kugadzirwa icho chiya kunzi hamuna munyika motikari dzotodhiraivha 5 years dzisina manumber plates. Zimbabwe is a collapsed state. And it's a collapsed state, ladies and gentlemen, which has remained in the hands of these thugs. We have got thugs or a gang of thugs running that country, masquerading as a government. This is why you see they put bills or mitemo. You could answer, hakuna munhu anofanira kutaura pa internet. Hanzi hapana munhu anofanira kuposta kana kuti asiri pa internet kwangoposta wasungwa. Vanotuma masiyaiwo kutuma zvanhu zvisina nebasa rese kuya kuUK kuzoripotera vana Chinyanga kuti Chinyanga rora ranzi bhomba yevanhu. So they just want to kill people without them being killed. They are happy killing us, but they don't want to die. If someone say, let's bomb them, then they will tell you, my British munada kuti bomba. Do you think Chinyanga has got capacity to bomb Zimbabwe? Hansi namkoma Darlington Kaguda, you the soldiers are the people that people are in fear of because the government is using you against us. Any protest done against the government, the government orders you guys to shoot us. That's why people are in fear. This is why I'm saying it's no longer time Yepuchka. If you see how many soldiers we have and how many ordinary citizens we have, they can't kill 15,000 people. When you use Zimbabwe and say enough is enough, they can't kill 15,000 people. Imagine what if the whole government came to report Chinyanga in the UK with Chinyanga has said bomb, this bomb, that, and the Chinyanga is a terrorist. Whilst they are hiding their terrorism. Chinyanga haana kana msoja, haana kana rekeni. You understand what I mean? The terrorists came to the UK to report Shinyanga with what he's saying is terrorism. If you go and try to define terrorism, what it means, you won't find Shinyanga as a terrorist. This is what a failed state does. When a failed state has failed, when a state has failed or is in the process of failing, but our own state has failed, the effective educational and health systems are privatized. Go to Zimbabwe today. If you want your daughter or son to receive proper education, you send them to private schools. Because public schools, they can't deliver any education now. So the education system has been privatized. The health system, private hospitals. Because ukaenda ku public hospital hakuna chaunowana, hakuna kana chikafu, hakuna kana gubezi rekufuga. So these are indicators of a failed state, with a resulting hodgepodge of shared schools and questionable medical clinics in the cities, or the public facilities become increasingly decrepit and neglected. If you go to Wilkins Hospital, you see it's neglected. You go to Parenyato, it's neglected. Most schools they are all neglected. Nanchiverenga advertisement irikudaizirwa maticha. Kurikunzi maticha vasina kuita kana O level, vasina kusvika kana 5 O levels varida kuticha. Hanzi apply muende mudzidzire kuticha. Ndinokudzidziswa kuticha nemunhu asina kubva shungu nechikoro, asina kubva achipasa munhu iyeye. Ndiye ari kunzi auya atrain as a teacher azonditicha inini. So you will see that the educational system has totally collapsed. Zimbabwe inorwadza. If you look at teachers, my doctors, my nurse, they are paid less, or they are paid late, or they are not paid at all. They can go 2-3 months without getting paid. This has increased even absenteeism, because most of them now, they work in private hospitals. Saka ndoenda iri kubasa kwandisingabhadharwe, chiremba omukira kuya kuzoita operation kuvhiya munhu iye asingabhadharwe. Textbooks, they are scarce. Kunotoone zvikoro zviri muZimbabwe zvisina kana mabhuku. Education system has collapsed. Kuenda kuzvipatara ma-X-ray machines, they broke down and they've never been repaired. And the reports of all those breakdowns have been sent to various ministries. Now, Minister Wakazembe, and those reports are just ignored because the state is a failed state. Citizens, especially those who are living in the rural areas, the students and patients, slowly realize that the state has abandoned them to their own devices and to the forces of nature. Ukaenda kumamisha zvinezvi, vanhu vako vakurarama nemidzi tadzokera kuchinyakare. Nyika isina kana paracetamol. Kune chimuti chimwe chatainwa kumusha chekuti kwakuvara chiri wainwa pain yaipera. Achisi achina kana kumbonyatso ongorwa unzi unoda dosage yakaita sei kuti pain ipere. Unongoda overdose nacho chimuti chiyachi. So you see that now the Zimbabweans have been abandoned to their own forces of nature. Vanhu vakungorarama semhuka munyika. You understand what I mean? Vanhu vakurarama semhuka munyika. Sometimes where a failed state is effectively split. Ukaenda unana Sudan, nyika inosplitwa. Ukaenda ku Zimbabwe, believe me, Zimbabwe is split into two. Zimbabwe is split into two. This is why we see Matabeleland cannot be developed. Because ZANU-PF ndofunga yuritikatasa Matabeleland irungoti imtwakazi. Ukaenda kuMatabeleland wotanga wapinda kuPrazi. City yakasiya yakavakwa nemabhunu kudhara, Bulawayo iyana nhasi ndozvairi. Andiriona. Saka Zimbabwe is split into two, just like Sudan. Because obvious, unokonzwa kuti kuMandebele kuBulawayo. You are deployed to go and work in Bulawayo, so effectively, the country is split into two. And nothing lasts forever, but for now, let's all register to vote and vote them out of power. Come 2023, we cannot go on like this forever and ever. So you will find that if you go to Bulawayo, essential services may be provided to the favored half. If you go to Zimbabwe, essential services may be provided to the favored half, probably the Shonas or Kumsoro, but not to the half in rebellion and engulfed, or if you go to Kunana, Sudan. And in most of the time, the destroyed nation state completely underperforms. If you go, my went in surplus, my went in the best minister, the best minister of finance in Africa, this and that and that. He is hiding behind a finger. He doesn't want to show he is failure, but the country or the state has completely underperformed since these gangsters came to power. They came now masquerading as a government. So if you go to Zimbabwe, we used to enjoy the highest literacy rate. But today, go there. Vana vachaenda kuchikoro, vana vakugara mastreets kana street kids. Kutiza mudzimba vachinogara mastreets vachikumbira. So it means our literacy rates has fallen. If you look at how many children die during birth, infant mortality has risen. Ndachema na us guys. Pane picture iri circulator pa internet kana vasati vaiona ndokuratidzai. Picture iyoyo kuzi zviri semjao zviri kufamba remona mwana. Picture ndaona hanzi mukomana uyu airidza kubend. Akamboridza namukoma system zvitazvida. Hapana sikaziye mukoma system zvitazvidaka. Ukuthi ndaimbovava foromani papurazi. Ndaimbova mukuru webasa pakambani. Kambani yese yaindigwadama. Ndakatadza kusevenzesa chinzvimbo changu. Ndaifunga musevenzi rombe hama iwe. Andaifunga musevenzi nhapwa haina ropa. Ndaivasevenzesa semhuka. Ndichivanyimawo mari yepeyi. Andiriona. Pane mufesi airidza gitare pasongu iyoyo. Ndachema mufesi akanhongwa nasomeone akarara paside peroad. Zvikanzi arwara asenda picture yake so akangorara akangoti kuma pambedha. He's critically ill, that gentleman. But guess what? These people, kana mukadzi wacho kana vana kana kuti they just took him vakanomudhamba pasango vakamusiya kuti afire musango. Azonhongwawo zvake nema-well-wishers, they took him to hospital. Guys, this is Zimbabwe. Andiriona. Zvinhu zvinorwadza mukoma Fred zviri sei munyoro zviri kufamba here mwana mai mweni zviri kufamba andimuriona. So you see that even if we say there is COVID, yes, COVID epidemic is over. COVID epidemic overwhelms any health infrastructure that continues to exist in our country. Life expectancies plummeted, and already poor and battered citizenry becomes even poorer and more immiserated. The people of Zimbabwe are more immiserated. We have become poorer and poorer. Those who are rich have become rich, rich and rich. At the bet mind, as you Victor do it. Zviri kufamba here. Unonzwa ukanoshitaura situation yeZimbabwe, unonzwa kurwadziwa so kuita kunge private property yangu. You understand? Zimbabwe is a failed state, ladies and gentlemen. Mukoma Steve Machiso. Zviri kufamba here. Failed states offer unparalleled economic opportunity, but only for the privileged few. Vanata 𝗥𝗶𝘀𝗲. Hanzi mai vakuru veuko asinesu adoko enyu takatobvako pakaipa holiday. So you see that failed states, they offer unparalleled economic opportunity, but only for privileged few. Those around the ruler or the ruling oligarch grow richer while their less fortunate brethren starve. If you look at 𝗥𝗶𝘀𝗲, if you look at 𝗦𝘆𝗱𝗶𝗶𝗄, they are the people around the ruling oligarchs. They have grown richer while the rest of the country became poor. We are starving. Very few people have grown richer. They have immense profits which are available from taking regulatory advantages. They made money. But the privilege of making real money when everything else is deteriorating is confined to clients of the ruling elite, or to especially favored external entrepreneurs. Those zvinondorwadza munyika. Could the privileged people, a few, a clique, a gangster, don't know what make mari. And ZANU-PF inyari, vana Scott vanobuda vakagara pamusoro millions US dollars, vane gold bullion vakamawaridza padesk, making loads of money whilst their brethren are suffering. Ladies and gentlemen, the nation state's responsibility to maximize the well-being and personal prosperity of all citizens is conspicuously absent. If it ever existed, Zimbabwe does not look at the personal prosperity of all its citizens. It just facilitates those privileged, those close to the ruling oligarchs. Those are the only people who are benefiting. The rest, unfortunately, you will die starving. You guys die starving. You are starving right now. Corruption has flourished in our country. Corruption flourishes in many states, failed states. But if you look at failed states, it often does so on an unusually destructive scale. Look at Zimbabwe. Corruption, how corruption had flourished in our country. And the destructive scale is so unusual. The corruption is so massive, to the extent that even Mnangagwa, who came to power and said he's targeting thieves around Mugabe, failed to stem down corruption. It's so massive, it's so big that the state cannot deal with itself because the state is corrupt. It has collapsed because of this corrupt people. There is widespread path of lubricating corruption as a matter of course, but escalating levels of venal corruption mark failed states. Venal, we have got what we call venal corruption. Yamotara nechishona kuti Corruption iri mutsinga yemuntu anochiona. This is what we call venal corruption. Ukaenda kuZimbabwe chioko muomwe chete. Ukadrive motikari yako ukasvika panapa, hanzi motikari yako haina zvakati ita mbichana. So kickbacks on anything that can be put out to fake tender. Ukatarisa izvinozvi kuti munhu awane tender yekusupply mabhuku kuzvikoro icorruption. Kuti kuvakwe mabridge icorruption. Kuvakwe road icorruption. Kuitika anonzi tourism concessions icorruption. Kuti vanhu vatenge vaccine chaiyo kubaya vanhu kuti vasafa neCovid icorruption. Saka you find that this is unnecessary, a waste of resources, unnecessary waste for construction projects. You will see them today if you go to Zimbabwe. Parliament yakanaka. That's wasteful. The people are starving. You are busy building parliament. What for? Because the people are starving. Those wasteful construction projects, they are arranged to maximize the rents that they generate. Ipapa muchatozonzwa kuti hanzi parliament ndiyaningi. Ipapa muchazvinzwa ipapa. Mubate kutaura kwangu. Muchazonzwa kuti parliament ndiyaningi. Andiri mona. Saka you find that nyaya tiri kutaura panapa inyaya yakanaka. Yekuti toita sei nenyika in such situations where corrupt ruling elites mostly invest their gains overseas. Toita sei nenyika. They invest their gains overseas. A very good example, ladies and gentlemen. Hanzi aurame mwana usina kuburisa something. Hanzi ndikachidze zviite. Andiri kuona nyaya. Ukatarisa izvinozvi hanzi a quantified evening brother 𝗤𝗿𝗶𝗺𝗔 is disheartening. It's heartening to live under ZANU-PF rule, but the catalyst is to register and vote. Thank you so much. So all these economic failures, they are catapulted by these idiots. These idiots, what they do, this corrupt ruling elite, mostly, they invest their gains overseas, not at home, making the economic failure of their states that much more acute. A good example is that young man aga hire band kubva South Africa kuya kuzoplaya muZimbabwe for 3 hours, and that band was given $60,000 US. Because anga charge 3,000 anga charge, I've multiplied it by 5, which means perhaps that gentleman or that woman who came to perform there went with about $150,000 US. And when he was asked, he said, boss, I invest my money outside Zimbabwe. So these are the signs of a failed state, where the Minister of Finance lives in Switzerland, the Secretary for Information lives in England, the Chief Justice lives in South Africa. And all these people, they don't live, they just fly to come and pretend to do work in Zimbabwe, but they don't live in Zimbabwe. And they don't live in Zimbabwe. So this has caused economic failure of Zimbabwe. And the failure is so acute for everyone to see. If you look at them, they dip directly into the coffers of the state. If you look at the coffers of Zimbabwe are shrinking. And these people, they've got no guts. They are still dipping into a shrinking state, still dipping into coffers of a shrinking state. what they just want to do is to pay for their external shenanigans. They've got a lavish lifestyle, lavish residences. Ukaona dzimba zimwe dzavari kuvaka muZimbabwe, mansions baba, in a state it is so failed. People, they build palaces, they build mansions, they've got a lavish lifestyle. They've got extensive, they engage in extensive overseas travel. Munanopo 50,000 US dollars, yekuya kuzospenda one day, achiona bora. As birthday present, 50,000 US dollars. Come on, Zimbabwe soldiers, I'm talking to you. Zimbabwe police officers, I'm talking to you. The prison officers, I'm talking to you. Air Force, I'm also talking to you, ladies and gentlemen, that you are in a country where these corrupt elites, they dip into the shrinking coffers of your state. After that, they amass loads of money to the extent that they sponsor one person who got 50,000 US dollars. Uende kunoona bhora reArsenal chete. Musoja akashanda 20 years. Ari kubuda $140 pension. Munhu ari kupuwa 50,000 US dollars kuenda kunoona bhora chete. Iwewe musoja 20 years dzawakashanda muarmy aubude ne 50,000 US dollars. Come on guys, come on. What are you doing? What are you doing? Honestly. And you call yourselves soldiers. You are deployed to gun down innocent civilians in the CBD of Harare. Ukabuda basa ubuda $140. Unaenda nayo kupi? Munhu wese anopiwa varupo 50,000 US dollars kukwira ndege from Harare kuyozona bhora reArsenal nekudzoka. Iwewe hauna chaunacho musoja. Basa rako ndokutora futi kunopfura innocent civilians. Hakuna chaunacho muCIO. Basa rako ndokutaura kuti Chinyanga ati chi muchinyepera maBritish police kuti Chinyanga is a terrorist. You have led the people of Zimbabwe down. You have led the people of Zimbabwe down. These ruling elites, they've presided over economic failure. They have directly sunk their hands into the coffers of a shrinking state to pay their extravagant life, lavish residences. They are building palaces, extensive. They are engaging in extensive overseas travel and the privileges and perquisites that feed their greed. Military officers vari kudenga ndo vari kubenefita chete. Vamwe vese vana mbiti tsuro dzimwe dzese hapana chavari kuwana. They are benefiting nothing. Imagine mukoma 𝗥𝗶𝘀𝗲, imagine my brother, $140 US only. Really? So why are they wasting time defending these corrupt ruling elites? Wasting your time. The soldiers in Zimbabwe, unoona vachimhanya nemotikari yaidhu mwaruku vachita movie style security just for $140 US when you retire. Our nation is rich and enormous, but those in power, they won't get sufficient age because this is a failed state. That's exactly the indicators of a failed state that I'm pinpointing now. And these corrupt ruling elites, they engage in extensive overseas travels. They build lavish residences. They build palaces, mansions. And only if in the army, the only people who benefit are only those who are at the top. They benefit from excessively corrupt regimes imbibe ravenously from the same illicit troughs, feeding troughs, as civilian officials. Vana Sanyatwe ndo vaakudla, vana Nyambuya ndo vaidla, vana Gava Sheba Gava ndo vaidla. As masoja acho nemapurisa are the reasons why we are suffering, because they support shit. They smear shit on their faces. I didn't want. So an indicator, ladies and gentlemen, of failure, but not a cause of failure, are declining real national and per capita levels of annual GDP. The statistical underpinnings of most states in the developing world are shaky. But the failed states, or particularly failed states with vast natural resources, exhibit overall worsening GDP figures, slim year-to-year growth rates, and greater disparities of income between the wealthiest and the poorest fifth of the population. High official deficits. A good example, if you look at Zimbabwe in 2001, reached more than 30% of GDP. Fund extravagant security expenditures. Ukaona vachitenga pfuti, vachitenga zvinhu zvinobva kuna China, hazvitipe chikafu. What they are just doing is siphoning of cash by friendly allies. MaChina acho achitora mari dzedu. Ivo vachiti unotenga zvombo zvezvombo zvenyika. They dance to shit, so their tune is nothing but shit. Zimbabwe inorwadza, ladies and gentlemen. If you look, inflation usually soars because rulers raid the central bank and print money. When they go to central bank, these corrupt ruling allies, they raid the central bank. They put their governor there, Manguzha, or then they start printing money and the rate of inflation rises. From the resulting economic insecurity, often engineered by rulers so as to maximize their own fortunes and their own political and economic power, there are many rents to be collected by entrepreneurs connected to the prevailing regime. Smuggling becomes rife. When state failure becomes complete, the local currency falls out of favor, and one or more international currencies take its place. A good example of our country. We don't have local currency. It has fallen. And American dollar has taken over. Money changers are everywhere, legal or not. And arbitrage becomes a steady international pursuit. Sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, especially if there are intervening climatic disasters, a good example of what we witnessed in Yanga, the economic chaos and generalized neglect that is endemic to failed states leads to regular food shortages and widespread hunger. Kukaita drought, kukaita tsunami, vanhu vanofa nenzara. Indeed, even to episodes of starvation and major efforts of international humanitarian relief. Zimbabwe, inyika izvinozve yakungorarama nekuti America tipeiwo. Vobvapo kubva kuti sanctions atikuvadza. America yobva yaunza US aid, koya rice, koya chibage, tozvifidha. Vanhu vachifa nenzara. So natural calamities sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, can overwhelm the resources even of non-failed state. We know that. But weak states in the developing world, taita dambudziko rekuti when competencies have consciously been sucked dry by unscrupulous rulers and their cronies, as in a failed Zimbabwe, as a failed state. Unseen natural disasters or man-made wars can drive ignored populations over the edge of endurance into starvation. What we are witnessing today is a war that has been initiated by the government against the people of Zimbabwe. This is why you see we are enduring, we've got endurance into starvation. Once such populations have lost their subsistence plots and their resources of income, they forfeit their homes and their already weak support networks and are forced into an endless cycle of migration and displacement. Mugatarisa zvino izvi, ZANU-PF has forced us into this cycle of migration. We have been displaced. A lot of Zimbabweans are stateless now. Vamwe vagara nyika zvino izvi 20 years munhu haana kana mapepa. Vamwe vagara muSouth Africa 20 years akudzingwa nhasi. Akwekuenda hapana. Ndabva ndafunga nyaya ndichipinda basa inini kuprison. Kune vanhu vakagara vanga vakagara mujeri 40 years, 50 years vari mujeri life prisoners. Vamwe vakapiwa amnesty life prisoners. Vakapiwa amnesty aitobvunza kuti nhai shefu saka ndiri kuenda kupi? Kuti ndikuenda kumba kwako, hanzi handichazivi kumba kwedu. It's because they were displaced or convicted and sentenced to imprisonment. Vari vadiki vakasiya Harare isati yavakwa, vachibuda iti handichazozivi ndiri kuenda kupi. Vamwe hama dzaimbotevera kusvika dzaneta atoelife kadzichauyi. Andimona zvakafanana we are displaced people, we are scattered all over the world. Paunodzokera kumusha zvino izvi unosvikaona amakuva chete. Hapana vanhu vapenyu vatinosvika tichiona kumusha uko. Unosvika tichiona makuva. Unenge wasara uri wega mumhuri. Ana mukoma 𝗤𝗵𝗀𝗶𝗶, if we can register and vote as Zimbabweans, we will remain idiots with no ideologies in the future. Definitely. So failed states provide no safety nets for its citizens, and the homeless and the destitute become fodder for anyone who can afford food and a cause. Ukada kuona nyaya yandikutaura panapa ndeye ukaenda muHarare, tenderera mastreets muHarare mustreet. Mune vasikana vaya vanogara mustreet vaya. Vazhinji vacho vese vane vana. Ukamubvunza kuti vana hanzi tinouya tichitorwa nemashefu enyu chaiwo. Vanhu vane motikari, vane mari. Vanotora vachienda vachiti abuse, vachitipa tumari tushomanini. Pamwe unobva kuwane nhumbu wakutozvara mwana. You will find kuti vana vari muroad meme vazhinji vacho vana Philip Chiyangwa. Vanenge vachitova tuma street kids vachinonama. Andinimona. Because Zimbabwe is a failed state. Zimbabwe also fails when it loses legitimacy. It becomes a failed state. Zimbabwe as a country does not have legitimacy. The government there is an illegitimate government. And it's an illegitimate government. So when it forfeits the mandate of heaven, that becomes an illegitimate government. It forfeits the mandate of heaven, killing innocent people. It's no more borders become irrelevant. If you go to Zimbabwe, my borders in Zimbabwe asina basi. Unokopinda nepaunoda. They've become irrelevant. Groups within the nominal borders seek autonomous control within one or more parts of the national territory. Or sometimes even across its international borders. Once the state's capacity to secure itself or to perform in an expected manner recedes, and once or what little capacity remains is devoted almost exclusively to the fortunes of a few or to favored ethnicity or community, there is a very reason to expect less and less loyalty to the state on the part of the excluded and disenfranchised. You cannot expect me to be loyal to Zimbabwe government. Never. I've been disenfranchised. I've been displaced. I'm not the only one. We've got millions and millions of displaced Zimbabweans. And you cannot expect loyalty from those people who are suffering in foreign countries. If you go to South Africa, what is happening in South Africa today? Unochema. MaZimbabweans are 𝗔𝗰𝗁𝗶𝗃. Varikunzi makwerekwe vatengesa musika yakapwanya yakatorwa zvinhu zvikapiswa. Kusara usina chaunacho unodzokera kumusha ari maoko. Because we have perceived our rulers, both vanhu vari kutonga marulers aya, to be working for themselves. They are working for themselves. They are working for their next of kins. They are working for their children. They do not work for the state. If they were working for the state, they were going to be legitimate. They don't work for the state, they work for themselves, work for their children, work for their kins. So their legitimacy, or the state of legitimacy that they claim, it plummets, it falls. This is why I'm saying Zimbabwe government is an illegitimate government. It does not work, the people in that government does not work for the state, but they work for themselves. The state increasingly is conceived as being owned by an exclusive class or group with all others pushed aside. Zvaiitwa naMugabe, dai Eustace ari panapa aitaura kuti waiona kuti the rest of the population has been pushed aside. Ukaenda kuZimbabwe government, the current Zimbabwe government, unoona ari mashurugwi chete arimo. Vana nc'uwe, kwaona na Owen Mudha nc'uwe, kwaona na Mutuli nc'uwe, kwaona na ana nc'uwe varimo, ndofunga the whole government in a half, vana nc'uwe. Instead of being the leaders, now they are rulers. Exactly. These are rulers. So the social contract that binds inhabitants to an overcharging polity becomes breached. We don't respect them. We don't respect them. Various sets of citizens cease trusting the state. Do you trust the state? You don't. I don't trust the state. Citizens then naturally turn more and more to the kinds of sectional and community loyalties that are their main recourse in time of insecurity and their main default source of economic opportunity. We have all turned to that. Atina chatinacho. So if you look at the people of Zimbabwe now, they've transferred their allegiance to kumadzimambo chaiwo kana kuenda kumamisha. Kumasabhuku ndiko kwave ne-allegiance nawo. Ukapinda mumatauni kwakuenda kuma-members of parliament, opposition as group leaders. Andimona. Saka you find kuZANU-PF manje kunenge kwane ma-warlords vakaita sana Chiyangwa vaiva. Or other ma-strongmen vanenge varimo vatakuona vakaita sana 𝗥𝗶𝘀𝗀 ndo vama-strongmen acho. They can derive support from external as well as indigenous supporters. So in the world, ladies and gentlemen, more marginalized corners of failed states, terror can breed along with the prevailing anarchy that naturally accompanies state breakdown and failure. So if you look at what's happening today in Zimbabwe, in every corner of the country, marobas. So we have got foot everywhere. There is a breakdown of rule of law because of the failure of state to stamp its authority. A collapsed state Zimbabwe is a rare and extremely version of failed state. Political goods are obtained through private or ad hoc means. Security is equated with the rule of the strong. Kuti ndiana ane masimba, ndiana ane mabhora esimbi. Andini murikuona. So Zimbabwe state exhibits a vacuum of authority as we talk, ladies and gentlemen. It is a mere geographical expression of a country, a black hole into which a failed polity has fallen. There is dark energy, but the forces of entropy have overwhelmed the radiance that hitherto provided some semblance of order. And order, vital political goods for the inhabitants, no longer the citizens. If you go to Zimbabwe today, those people in Zimbabwe, they are no longer the citizens, they are just inhabitants, embraced by language of ethnic affinities of border. Amantere, Amachi, ukasvika kweko kwakuya mazambians, makaranga, vanonzi machi, maIbho, kuti saka you will find that Zimbabwe now no longer have citizens, it has got inhabitants. Vavanhuwo vanobva kune dzimwe nyika vanongopindawo imomo, but maZimbabweans chaivo vashoma vasara. Andiri muri kuona. So our country is collapsed. If you look at the collapse of our country, you can look at the collapse of Somalia. We've collapsed just as good as Somalia. Bosnia, Lebanon, and Afghanistan. We have collapsed in a similar manner in the last 2-3 decades. And more. And Nigeria, Nana Sierra Leone, it's like a collapse. So when those collapses occurred, sub-state actors took over, as they always do when the prime polite disappears. Those warlords, varipo vakutonga, or sub-state actors, they gained control over regions and sub-regions within. And murugona. Osaka murugona kuti masabu, warlords atina waya, ndo vanhu vakutonga. These are warlords. Vana munanga goma bouncer. Zvatakataura last time tikati mungatora nyika musira mabouncer here. Mabouncer, they are not even recognized that they are even ignoring the fact that they are illegitimate. They are not recognized anywhere in the world. Kana vachirecognizwa, vanorecognizwa nemamwe substate or warlords mamwe vakangotora masimba zvechisimba. Andiri muri kuona. So, ladies and gentlemen, Zimbabwe is a failed state. It's a state that is under a warlord. And that warlord has got no mental capacity to run a country. He's got no entrepreneurial endeavors that he can bring to our country. Chavanoziva is drug and guns. They are faking drugs and guns. These are what is compatible with their terror. None of the designations is terminal, ladies and gentlemen. Zimbabwe is, as I'm speaking, the country is moving so rapidly from its former basket case of Zimbabwe to a begging bowl now. They've moved so fast from being a strong country to from a bread basket to a pauper country. So the quality of failed or collapse is real if you look at Zimbabwe. And it demands. Saka nyaya dzatiri kutaura, ladies and gentlemen, ndizvokuti nyika yedu has collapsed. For decades, Zimbabwe has failed. So it has joined other countries like Afghanistan, Angola, Burundi, Congo, and so forth, and Sierra Leone, Nana Sudan. Those are failed states, and we have tabatana now takutoma failed states. Ma drugs akuitwa mu Zimbabwe like Indonesia and Colombia. Zvinhu zvinoshamisa. So quite a lot of questions that needs to be answered neZANU-PF, how things came to be. And this morning, saka mwanzo ndataura kuti zvakutanga ziyawo kumwe. Saka problem ndeyekuti kana zvakutanga so hatichakwanisi kuramba ndichikondinya naye. Saka nyaya yatakutaura ndeyekuti hakuna imbofunga kuti vana mabhutu seseseko vachaenda. Vana mabhutu seseseko, when their lubricant ran out, the machine was brought to a standstill. This is gonna happen in Zimbabwe again, ladies and gentlemen. That the machine, that lubricant, the lubricant that lubricate the ZANU-PF machine has been brought to stand still by none other than Nelson Chamisa. The inability of ZANU-PF to generate a volume of rewards consistent with the clientelistic ambitions is the key. They can't pay civil servants, they can't pay soldiers, they can't pay police and nurses. So their inability to meet those demands or needs of those people definitely have led to warring divisions in these departments. And those warring divisions have weakened the ZANU-PF further, weakened the state further. This is why I am saying that what is required now is just internal displacement. Internal removal of ZANU-PF. Those are how do, ladies and gentlemen. Saka, for today, regaindi mirire pano, anumugona zvakuta masango. Pano vanga vachibvunza mukoma Shapiro, mukoma zvinenge zvakandipresa. Saka na zvatanga kundipresa so nenda kutoti kana nemasacha anomona matsvikiro anenge aita. I hope munamato yenyu iri kusvika, rabai muchinamata. Pamwe Mwari vangandichengeta vangandinzwa. Saka chiregai ndite call it quits. Then we probably meet tomorrow if time permits. Good night. And sikuimba boss ndakutonzwa kuda kutoumburuka izvozvi. Saka good night guys, good night.